Hello everyone, this is Jabra with more Old Testament, and we are in the part of the book of Genesis that the Jews call Vayetzi, which means and he left, and talking about Jacob leaving Beersheba, leaving Beersheba and headed towards Haran to find a wife at his father's ancestral home. And where we left it in the previous segment was he left, and there is a little story I read afterwards from Jewish literature, Jewish midrashim. These are stories that Jewish rabbis tell and interpretations that they give. And it says this part starts with Jacob leaving Beersheba. They say this is usually not an important detail because we know he was in Beersheba. So why does the writer say that he was in Beersheba? And they say basically to indicate he left, and he is a blessed man, so it's important to indicate that he left the place and he takes the blessing with him. So anyway, I thought that was really interesting. He sees the vision of the ladder, and the ladder basically indicates that he's about to get into this new place. It's about his growth, the growth that's about to happen, about his ascension, probably a symbolism to his ascension in the covenant and his place with God. And he makes a covenant with God. He receives the full blessing with God. And now we're headed in this segment. We're going to talk about him meeting Rachel, and then the love story, the marriage with Rachel, but then also marrying Leah, the trick that his uncle plays on him, or was it a trick? And then in the segment following this, we're going to talk about I don't know what to call it, Cold War, Hot War, the nuclear war of having children, competition between Leah and Rachel. And that's also a theme that we've seen so far in the stories of the matriarchs, having trouble bearing children, then being blessed. But then we have here a matriarch, a Jewish matriarch, Leah, who actually had no problem getting children, but probably there is a reason for that. So stay tuned. We're going to talk and cover about this and cover all of these things. And I'm going to go slowly in the next 2 or 3 segments through this story and explain all of the details in it to you. So that's where we're at. So now we start today with chapter 29, where Jacob basically moves and he goes east. He goes to Haran, or Padan Aram as it's called, the Mesopotamia, and he gets to a well in the desert. A bunch of shepherds are standing there talking. There is this massive rock, massive stone. Notice rocks appear a lot in the story so far, in the story of Jacob after he leaves Beersheba. He sleeps on rocks, he dedicates a rock to be a temple, and now he's faced with this great rock uh, that will play a role in a few seconds here. People are talking, and he's asking about his uncle Laban. So he's seeking his uncle Laban to stay with him, and he asks about him, and he says, "Is he well?" In verse 6. So he asks about the wellness of his uncle. People had short lifespans in those days, and so you never knew if your uncle that you haven't seen or heard from in a while is still alive or not. And they say, yes, he is okay. And here is his daughter Rachel coming in with the shepherd, now with the sheep. Now, let me stop here and talk about some of the names that we will encounter. And I should have done that earlier in this segment so far. But we're going to encounter Rachel. And Rachel, her name means ewe. And I don't know if I'm saying that right. Ewe, ewe, a female sheep. And then Leah, her sister, is actually, the name means different things and they are not nice. But Leah is a certain kind of cow, and it's usually a wild cow, a cow that is untamed. But it can also mean someone who's wearied, or someone who toils a lot, or someone who suffers through hardship. And then we will encounter later two characters, and I might as well talk about their names here because I'll come back to it later. Zelpa means a drop, and it's so, but it's a weird word, zalafa in Arabic, which is also the same Semitic root for the Hebrew word zelfa. Zalafa means sort of dripping water, but it drips and it's in a like it means a full tub, or a tub full of water. And in a weird way, it's an ancient word that doesn't have a lot of modern context to it, but that's what it means in classical Arabic text. And then we have Bilha. Now, it's spelled in most English scriptures Bilheh, but in Arabic, in Hebrew, and Semitic roots, it's more like Bala. Bala. That's how it sounds. And she's another one of the servants who will encounter. And actually, Zilpah and Bala are the actual matriarchs of the Jewish nation. Rachel and Leah are only considered the matriarchs because of the rules at the time, and I spoke earlier about the Zuni tablets and how the rules worked for kids had through a concubine. But Zilpah and Bella are also mothers, matriarchs of the Jewish nation. Anyway, Bella's name means calamity, from bala, calamity, terror, trouble. So keep those names in mind as you encounter their children, and the names of the mothers in the story. So anyway, so that's a divergence. But Rachel comes in with the sheep. Rachel, or I'm going to have to check how it's said. And they say, "Yeah, here is his daughter Rachel, and she's here with the sheep." And he says, "Okay, well, water the sheep." But they are waiting for someone to come and roll this massive rock off the well so that they can water. And this is sort of in those communities, this is sort of like their security of how you secure your water well, which tells you that this water well either belonged to someone who was protecting it, or some specific person needed to come in and water and draw water, or allow the water to be drawn, and the shepherds have the water. Anyway, but Jacob, not very good with rules and following protocol and rules and culture and tradition. He sees Rachel, and it says in the scripture, she is a shepherd. She is a shepherdess. She is someone who is a carer, who takes care of sheep. She is also tough. This is a lot. When it says in the scriptures that she was a shepherdess, that says a lot about her character as a person. Now, Rachel is a very important matriarch in Judaism, and I think the author of Genesis is trying to show her in the best light possible. So Jacob goes at an act of machismo, manliness, or whatever you want to call it, showing off. He goes and rolls the rock of the well, and he waters her sheep. And not only that, he does something that is very strange in verse 11. He approaches her and he kisses her. Now that is, when I saw it, every time I see it, you read the scriptures, and every time I see it, I'm shocked by this, because we're talking about this desert society. Bedouins honor women. You protect them. They're not supposed to talk to strangers. And he approaches her and kisses her, and he weeps. Now, nobody knows why he wept. Some midrashim, some Jewish legends, some Jewish teaching says that it's because he could foresee the future, and that she's gonna die, and they're gonna be buried in separate land, lands and all of that stuff. But no, there is no reason for why he would cry. Maybe it's the relief that he's seen a relative. Uh, I don't know. But he kisses her, and that is a strange thing. Now, I've spoken in an earlier segment about the rights of cousins. Your direct cousin has, if you're a female, has a right to marry you above anyone else. So if you're in love with someone, the someone needs is getting engaged to you, but you're the cousin, the parents of the female give priority to a direct cousin in those cultures. And so he kisses her. He doesn't have gold or anything to give her to sort of claim her as his bride, but he kisses her, and he tells her that he is her cousin. He is Rebecca's daughter, and she rushes along and tells her dad. And Laban comes in, and Laban is excited to see his nephew. And of course, he stays a month with Laban, and I assume he's been serving Laban all that time, but Laban insists on paying him. But there is an interesting dynamic going on in here, because you're living with your uncle, you're with your kin, your family. You don't expect a hire in a way. It's sort of a shame to take money from your uncle or be paid. It's really hard to explain, but it's this tradition. You don't ask for pay, you don't ask for money, you don't ask for compensation. And Laban says to him, "You are my kin, you are my flesh and bones. You can't work for me for free. What do you want?" Jacob says, "I want Rachel." Now, here is an interesting part of the story. Rachel is the youngest, Leah is the oldest. So, and of course, they say Leah's eyes were beautiful, were gorgeous, but Rachel, she was good looking as a whole. She was, in the Hebrew and Arabic, the words, it says she looked good, and she presented well. That's a literal translation of the Hebrew here. Um, so poor Leah. I mean, her eyes were beautiful. That basically tells you, it's sort of a negative statement telling you that she is not otherwise attractive. And of course, her name, wild cow, weary, toil, hardship. She's not presented well. Feel sorry for her. And Leah in here is the one you feel sorry for throughout the story. And I think the Lord's providence, again, the Lord, all of these stories, the Lord is always with the oppressed and the weak. Whether it's Hagar, and in the story, whether it's Leah, the blessings follow the weak and the oppressed. So Jacob chooses to serve for 7 years, and he is probably aware of the tradition that the oldest needs to be married before the youngest. And so probably that was, or Laban organized it so that, okay, we'll wait for 7 years, you work for 7 years, and maybe Leah would be married by then. But the 7 years passed so fast because Jacob was so in love. So 7 years of service to his uncle went by like nothing, and it's wedding night. Now, here is another interesting part of the story. Laban does a trick. He I assume, veils Leah and marries her to Jacob. And Jacob, they go into the tent. I assume they do what happens between newly married husband and wife. And in the morning, he discovers that it is Leah. Now, you wonder, how can you be so intimate with a person, marry a person, go and be intimate and not know who you got married to? Nobody knows an answer to this question. The best answer is, based on the culture I know, is she was veiled, she was covered, uh, having having intercourse in those societies, and to this day in villages across the Middle East, very, very traditional villages, they are decreasing. This practice is almost extinct. The woman is veiled and until she's no longer a virgin. But this is an old practice. Maybe that's what's happening here. It's all speculation. But Jacob discovers the trick, and here is the thing. There is a huge dynamic here, because remember what he's done to Esau. And this is Laban. He goes to Laban, and Laban reminds him of the rights of the firstborn in that society. And so here it is. Here is the first of Jacob's sort of punishments in a way, or the magic turns against the magician. It's probably to help him build empathy and help prepare him later on for the encounter with Esau that will happen 20 years later. It's probably to help him understand Esau's feelings and frustration. He is forced to follow the rights of the firstborn. No more breaking the rules. So he offers to work 7 more years. He marries Rachel at that same time, but he has to work for 7 more years for his uncle Laban. Now, Laban, if you remember, he tried to keep Rebekah in, and he's asking Jacob to serve him for 7 years and 7 years more, and later on there will be more years of service. And again, it is for him to keep the money, to keep the dowry, to keep whatever Jacob makes and whatever he's given Jacob as dowry for his daughter, to keep that in the family. He doesn't want to lose all of that. Remember, he wanted to keep Rebekah in because she had Eliezer gave her all that gold, and the story brings attention to that fact that Laban noticed the gold when he saw Rebekah, and so he's trying to keep that in. So he wants to keep the money, and poor Leah. So he gives him Rachel after a week, and then he gives her Bella, so to be her servant. And it says in verse 30, he goes into Rachel and he loved her more than Leah. Again, you feel very, very sorry for Leah. She's in this marriage, um, and she's not loved. And you can tell it's heartbreaking. The heartbreak comes across through the names that she gives her children. So her first children. So and notice in verse 31, it starts with, God knew that Leah was hated, and so he gave her children, and Rachel was barren. So it is sort of divine justice in here, again, to bring attention to the fact that God is always with the oppressed, the hated, the person who injustice was done to. So verse 32, we start the children. Leah gets Reuben, and Reuben is the first part of his name. Ra'ah is taken from Ra'ah, which means to see, because God has seen my weakness, and now my husband will love me. She's hoping my husband will love me. And then she gets another child, called him Shim'on or Simeon, from Shema or Sama'a, which is to hear, to listen to. So she says, I've gotten a child because God has heard me. He notice how many times she refers to, I was hated, my husband, maybe now my husband will love me, and so now God will hear me. And then Levi, Lawi, or Levi, from the verb lawa, which means to twist or turn. And she says, this time my man will turn to me. And that's why she called him Levi or Lawa. And then she has another child, and she called him Yehuda or Judah in English. We say Judah, it's Yehuda, which is a verb. And interestingly enough, it's Yahada. It's similar to the root in a very complex way that I can't explain here. It's similar to Hamada in Arabic, and it means to thank. And so this time she's just thanking God. She is humbled to the ground, and she's thanking God, and she calls him Yehuda, and then she stops having children. So this is where this part ends. Very rich with detail. Poor Leah, Rachel, poor Rachel too, and poor Jacob for having to deal with what's going to happen next. It's a triangle that's going to get more complicated, but that's why this book is called Genesis, Bereshit. It's not just about the creation of the world. It's about the creation of the Jewish family. It's about the creation of the covenant. And these stories and these little meanings here and there are going to be crucial to the story as we go into it. So this is what I have for you today in this segment. More to come tomorrow. Stay tuned. Thank you for listening.